a sculptor. I work out of Adelaide, exhibit works in Australia and I guess quite a bit overseas recently. Invited into in Korea in about '95. I just finished a large commission in Europe, and then to the Pucheon Sculptor Symposium. So we went over to Korea and we constructed there quite a major work. Very exciting, treated very well in Korea. It was a wonderful trip. We created a major work which now sits by a lake. I think it is actually Lake Pucheon. A large work, guardian figure, was finished in the early 90s for Singapore, placed in central green development, I think on sort of a second level. It's in a very exciting position. This work was fabricated in Australia at DeMille Engineering and moved by both road transport and obviously sea transport, and lifted by a very large crane into place. Great job to do. Shanghai Art Fair, I think, was about 2003. Again, we moved a very large work, whirling mandala, about 3.5, 4 metres tall, over to Shanghai, and this work was the central focus for the exhibition. Just right now, just laying out a drawing, which is an important part of the process for making the larger sculptures. The drawing goes directly onto the steel in chalk, and there's a lot of sort of quite subtle consideration about line and just how the whole piece works. So the work's simply being laid out, but I'm just showing a lot of care about individual lines and how all of these sort of hang together into the total sculpture before we go on to making it. Jamie, could you just come and give me a hand, please, mate, to bring this plate in? I work with Jamie Willis, so the two of us work together in the studio. He's actually important in the process as well because the work is really quite complex, and also you need somebody who's very patient with the work to finish it off properly. I mean, this is the difference between fabricating and making sculpture. The sculpture is very accurate work.
My role is doing a lot of the cutting, grinding and welding, fabrication. So it's quite physical, and sometimes you can be grinding all day for a couple of days on end. You've got all your safety gear on and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's fairly difficult work.
So I use Corten steel, which is steel with copper and chrome in it. But it ages to a much more even finish than mild steel. But again, the colours I think reflect the colours in our landscape. I use that. I use stone, but when I use stone, I use broken stone, which I'll assemble back into a form. Again, those broken stones I think reflect how stone appears in our landscape, which is much different to Europe, of course. And the other thing I use to some extent as well is Australian woods, red gum, jarrah. Those rusty colours very much reflect the ochre and the actual rusty steel colours you get in the Australian landscape. Placing public sculpture at present, it has really, actually I think it's almost got out of control, the issues around, I'm always very safe with my work, but the safety issues and some of the health and OC issues are really, it's almost getting difficult to place any work. There's issues about climbing and people head entrapments and such, which I take so seriously, but it's got very, very, very tight. Large work I did in Sydney only finished about 18 months ago. I mean, this is a really major work, and I would like to think it's culturally important as well. But in the end, with this work, a fence was erected around it within a few weeks because I worried about people climbing up the sculpture and falling off the top or banging their heads. I wanted a property where I could place my sculptures without any interference. Palmer was acquired in December 2001. Initial motivation was to find a piece of more archetypal Australian landscape which I thought I could engage my sculpture with. And really the other aspect there was it was a place where I could place my sculpture without any interference. I had freedom to put the work out here I wanted to put out. It's an area, I think incredible landscape, it's rain shadow country, but at the same time this place was cleared of vegetation very, very quickly. The word is that within 5 years of European arrival here, these hills were basically cleared of the she oak scrub. The environmental side is very important for Palmer, 400 acres, which is under very strict revegetation. So we're actually bringing back here the genetic, we call it genetic character of the place, what would have been here as close as we can possibly get before European arrival. So it's a returning landscape from sheep country and going back to something like it would have been 150 years ago. The original people here, of course, were the Paramank. Those people are still important to this place, and we have tried to include them as well. We sort of accept that there is both a blackfella and whitefella history to this country. And in the floating figures, I think there's both aspects included in those sculptures. There's the elongation you get in Aboriginal rock paintings and some of the ochre forms, which I've always loved since I was a young fella. So that forms an influence on them. But the head is rather helmeted, like the helmeted figures out of Europe, almost like knights and such. The boats in my sculpture, which I made quite a few of, the titles for those are run aground. And these works for me are forms that really relate to European arrival here, but as some other people have picked up, it is boat-like, but it's slightly pod-like at the same time, so the form has slightly changed. Arrivals here arrive, particularly Europeans, as conquerors, but in a way they slowly get conquered because that culture changes away from initial European culture and gets affected by the landscape. So sort of talking about those ideas, I guess, in a sculptural context. So the boat forms then sort of change into more pod-like forms, and the pod-like forms are like the forms we'll find in seed pods in the Australian landscape and perhaps even rocks. And then there's a further change from that work into a group of works called the Settled Explorers, which these works have a human feel to them, but you can still see the connection with the boat, but they look human-like at the same time. And these works also, including them, have aspects of particularly the parallel sand dunes you see over northwestern Western Australia. So I've included those sort of forms into them. So there's been a real transformation from boats through to these settled explorers that are hopefully sort of settled on the land in a way. Mentor the Old Mob, this piece is really influenced quite directly by Palmer. If you observe Palmer, you'll see a lot of stone around the place, but again it's quite broken and quite vulnerable. With Mentor the Old Mob, while it's made of steel, there are many little rock forms that make that piece up, so it's sort of reconstructed from these broken individual little rock forms. There are a lot of rock formations that, strangely enough, look like frogs. The old fella storyteller were influenced directly by the frog rocks, and in a way I've made that work to sort of fit in with some aspects of this landscape. Returning Figure is a piece up on a hill at Palmer. It's bent in one direction. The reason I put that work up there is that the winds here tend to bend all the trees. In a way, the connection with landscape is, I think, me coming to grips with this place and producing these forms, which partly reflect forms in the landscape, but sort of hint at, I think, almost a connection which involves sort of caring for place as well.